of course, a lot of sacrifices, particularly in your personal life. But for me, it outweighs any cons that come with it. So,
thank you very much. I think those were very, very inspiring words for all those that really want to pursue a career in this area. And I think as soon as, also the other participant will join and will hear that, they will be very inspired and more eager to pursue such a career. So thank you.
Yes, Your Excellency. It was very nice to hear all about it. If it's okay, I would like to begin. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for your patience. We are very proud to present the first edition of ILSA's Diplomatic Days. We're very excited about it. It's officially after 4, so let's begin. Before we start, we would like to introduce ourselves as moderators today. My name is Sofia Esporn Olivares. I'm from Mexico, and I'm 21 years old. I'm a second-year European and International Law student and an ILSA Ambassador.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gustavo Jimenez. I am 24 years old. I am from Peru. I am also a second-year International European Law student at the Hague University. I would also like to welcome everyone that is also watching us from the live stream on YouTube. We are very, very, very excited to be closing the last day of ILSA's Diplomacy Days with such an amazing guest. This event was planned and organized by the International Law Student Association, the Hague chapter. So I would like to invite the president, Bianca Maria Leajo, to briefly present our organization.
Thank you very much, Gustavo. And again, welcome everyone and welcome Your Excellency. And thank you again for accepting our invitation and being here today. A few words about ILSA. So ILSA is a study association within the International and European Law Program at the Hague University of Applied Sciences. And the goal of ILSA is to promote the study, the profession, and the development of international law. And this goal is achieved through the ILSA, through the efforts of the ILSA supporters and the ILSA members. And for that, ILSA works through different subgroups. So we have the main events committee, the social events committee, the ILSA journal committee, and from this week, the debut of the ILSA ambassador team, which together organize events, workshops, and amazing projects like this one that help students have a better insight from about the fascinating world of international law. Now I would like to give the floor back to Sofia and Gustavo. Enjoy today's session, everyone.
Thank you, Bianca. Now moving on to officially starting today's event. Just quickly for attendees, we would like to tell them how the event is going to proceed. Firstly, we will engage in dialogue with His Excellency, in particular on his life as a diplomat. And secondly, we will be addressing various topics which are currently important for Argentina. We would like to warmly welcome today's honored guest. His Excellency has a variety of expertise. Amongst other distinguished positions, he was a legal advisor of the Argentine Foreign Ministry and also head of the Consular Office of Argentina in New York.
It is with great pleasure that we would like to welcome the Ambassador of the Republic of Argentina to the Netherlands, Mario Oyarzábal. Muchas gracias, señor embajador. Nosotros estamos profundamente agradecidos por su presencia el día de hoy. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
muchas gracias and good afternoon to all. Let me start by saying that it is a great pleasure and a privilege to have this opportunity to have an exchange with such talented group of students. In addition to, or perhaps to put it more appropriately, as part of my career as a diplomat, I have sought to specialize in international law, which for Argentina and for all countries, particularly for small and mid-sized countries, is a crucial foreign policy tool. So when I received this invitation from ILSA chapter The Hague, I was very excited. And again, I would like to thank the organizers for this invitation and to all of you for your attendance. So, what about me? I would say in a nutshell that since high school, I was interested in world history and international relations, and I wanted to be a diplomat. From that personal point of view, being ambassador is a dream come true. Argentina has a professional foreign service since the 1960s, where the only way to join the ranks is through the diplomatic academy, which is extremely competitive. Therefore, as I prepared to go to university, my father recommended that I study a career that would open as wide work opportunities as possible. And this is how I decided to study law at the University of La Plata, which is the second largest in Argentina, which I hated at first, I have to say. But I fell in love soon after, and where I discovered my passion for international law, public and private. So much so that later on I applied to study an LLM at Harvard Law School, during which I focused on international law, public and private, and international human rights law. Then it became only natural that after I joined the Argentine Foreign Service, I have tried to conjugate diplomacy and the law, and thus to become a counsel for the state, as I define myself. In my diplomatic career, I had two postings abroad, as I was just mentioned as Deputy Consul in New York and as alternate permanent representative at the Permanent Mission of Argentina to the United Nations, including during the period when Argentina last served as a non-permanent member of the Security Council. In the headquarters, I served first as assistant legal advisor and later, right before moving to The Hague, as the legal advisor to the Foreign Ministry for 4 years. In those capacities, I was involved in two cases before the International Court of Justice, the Pulpmans case on the River Uruguay, and the more recent advisory opinion on the legal consequences of the separation of the Chagos Archipelago from Mauritius in 1965. I was also involved in the first advisory opinion requested to the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea for the responsibilities and obligations of states sponsoring persons and entities with respect to activities in the area. I am also currently a member of the Permanent Court of Arbitration of the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes, ICSID, and the International Humanitarian Fact-Finding Commission established by Additional Protocol 1 of the Geneva Conventions. In my more recent past, I was a member of the Committee on the Election of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, the Argentine Commissioner to the International Whaling Commission, and I have also represented Argentina before the International Maritime Organization, the International Seabed Authority, UNCITRAL, UNIDROIT, and the Hague Conference on Private International Law. Since March 2020, I am the ambassador of Argentina here in the Netherlands, having presented my credentials to the King last July when the pandemic allowed it. And I am also the permanent representative to the international organizations that have a seat here in the Netherlands, notably the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, the Hague Conference on Private International Law, and the Common Fund for Commodities. I moved here with my husband and my dog, and I am, or we are, I would say, thrilled to be here working in the Netherlands for Argentina. The Netherlands is a country with which Argentina shares many values and many interests in common, and also, of course, to be working before international organizations, some of which are of legal nature and of extreme importance for Argentina, for Argentina's traditional policy of promoting the rule of law at the international level, which includes a world free of nuclear and chemical weapons, and also justice for the most serious crimes of international concern. The Hague is also a city that is very dear to me, having come here on many occasions in the past, including in January 2020, when I was already ambassador designate, that I came to deliver a special course at the Hague Academy on international law on the influence of public international law upon private international law. So I guess I will stop here in order to avail time for the conversation.
Muchas gracias, Your Excellency. And thank you again for accepting our invitations. We are very honored to have you here, and we're looking forward to learning more about your journey. Now, we will first like asking you a bit more questions about your role as an ambassador.
Thank you for all the information. I'm sure such a demanding job comes with a great number of challenges. So on this role, what is diplomacy for you? What would you say are the most important traits that define a great ambassador?
Well, that is a very interesting question because the profession is often surrounded by a myth, if I can call it that, which consists of associating the word diplomatic with tricks, even deceit, to influence people or countries for that purpose and make them do what they wouldn't do otherwise. I think that on top of the fact that such an idea is offensive and grossly underestimates other people's and countries' capabilities, I think it is exactly the opposite to what a good ambassador should be. Someone who is tough and an effective negotiator, who is sensitive in dealing with others and in such a way as to attain national interests and to avoid confrontation, but who is truthful and reliable. So there I mentioned three traits that I think are important. First, be a tough and effective negotiator, which entails achieving a negotiation outcome that best serves your country's national interests, which in turn requires to adopt clear red lines and get to understand the red lines of the other country, and then work imaginatively and constructively for the outcome for an outcome that is as close as possible to your country's requirements. Second, to be loyal and truthful to your boss and reliable to your fellow ambassadors. That entails, in my view, never to lie or misrepresent to your minister, no matter how expedient something might appear to be at the moment. If you think that a course of action will be bad for your national interests, the ambassador should say so. Of course, within the bureaucratic chain of command and not outside of the government. An ambassador also should never commit to something that he or she cannot deliver, as it is not your own honor, but mainly the honor of your country which is at stake. There are other traits which I think they are also important. One of them is to study history, because history often repeats itself, and to avoid as much as possible mistakes from the past. To have an analytical temperament that is to be able to read the situation and understand your counterpart. Why a certain country or a diplomat defends a certain position. Another trait, I think, is to cultivate resilience, expecting periodic policy defeats and move on to the new challenge. And of course, to build long-term physical and mental stamina, because if you think that after a long day of negotiations, ambassadors are eager to go to a dinner or reception to continue to talk about work, you are plainly wrong. And finally, I would say that choosing to be a foreign service officer is much more than choosing a career. I think it is choosing a very particular nomadic, I would say, way of life, with all the pros and the cons that it entails personally and for your family. Never living in a place more than 3 or 4 years, constantly making new friends, only to leave them again. To be away from your country and your family more often than not. Your spouse often is unable to pursue their career.
Thank you very much. It was really interesting. In particularly, you mentioned about crossing the red lines of other countries. And we have this question. In your opinion, what can be done to overcome some difficulties which may arise in situations where people from different cultural backgrounds need to cooperate? Did you ever experience such situation yourself, and how did you cope with it?
I think cultural conflicts tend to occur for mainly 2 reasons. First, because we tend to rely on stereotypes. This leads to distorted expectations about the people's behavior and to misinterpretations. And second, because we tend to interpret other people's behavior through the lens of our own culture. I think to cooperate, you need to overcome this tendency. Before partaking in any negotiation, you should take the time to study the context and the person on the other side of the table, including the various cultures to which they belong, whether the culture of the country, the culture of the profession, or the particular culture of the agency or the company. Because very often the negotiations we diplomats are involved in are technical in nature and involve other ministries and the private sector. I think the more you know about the other people, the higher the likelihood of exploring and discovering value-creating creative solutions. When you work at the United Nations, but also here in The Hague, at the OPCW, the ICC, or the HCCH, you experience such situations more often than not.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Connected to that, we want to know to what extent is an ambassador required to promote the country's values to foreign political leaders?
Thank you. I think the foreign policy of any given country is a representation of that country's values. A country cannot promote human rights abroad and yet violate them within its borders. It cannot ask other countries to respect international law if itself doesn't abide by the rules of the game. I believe that the latest decades have been witness to a tension at the international level between the principle of non-intervention, which is a corollary of sovereignty of the state, and the quest for the universality of human rights, but also sustainable development, environmental protection, and the preservation of the planet for future generations, of common goods, generally speaking. Countries and societies have come to the realization that in a world that is more and more interdependent, sovereignty has to give in many respects. Insofar the values of Argentina are aligned with universal values, I think it is definitely my duty to promote them to foreign leaders and the international fora. And inasmuch as countries have a duty to respect international law, the promotion of democracy in particular cannot be construed as interference in the internal affairs of other countries.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now, talking about something that is also common, unfortunately, for the rest of the world, is the current pandemic, which has unfortunately affected everyone on various levels. We are really curious to know, how has this shaped your role as an ambassador? What sort of challenges has the embassy faced, and what effort has it taken to address these challenges?
Well, I would say that it has changed my role or shaped my role tremendously. I think the pandemic has helped to put a human face to diplomacy. Even for someone like me who has been a consul in the past, so I'm used to dealing with citizens, including I was a consul during September 11, when I was serving at the time at the Consulate General of Argentina in New York, and was faced with the death of 4 Argentines as a consequence of that heinous terrorist attack. I think the pandemic also puts in value the importance of international cooperation. During the first semester of 2021, my role was very much focused on assisting the Argentines stranded here in the Netherlands and in other countries to return to Argentina and to cope with the reality of such unprecedented difficulties far from their country and their families. That included coordinating dozens of repatriation flights on which hundreds of Argentine nationals and residents were able to fly back to Argentina, not only from the Netherlands, but also from other European countries, even Africa and Asia. I have to say that I cannot be more grateful to the Dutch authorities for their cooperation in this regard, including as they facilitated transit through Schiphol Airport, as well as repatriation to Caribbean countries. A special challenge has been and continues to be to fulfill my role as ambassador while making sure that the staff of the embassy is safe and ensure that a healthy working environment is in place.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Since there are a lot of students with us today interested in pursuing a career in this domain, I have a question. What are the primary responsibilities of an ambassador?
Well, as you all probably know, the function of an ambassador as the head of the diplomatic mission are stated in the 1961 Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. In general, and from a formal standpoint, I would say that without prejudice to the functions as stated in the Vienna Convention, my responsibilities and those of my fellow diplomatic colleagues, because I remind you that the ambassador is often but the lead of a team of diplomats, I think are first to promote and safeguard the interests of Argentina and its nationals abroad, before states and international organizations. In this case, before the Kingdom of the Netherlands and the international organizations based here in the Netherlands. Second, to seek and identify opportunities for cooperation on matters of mutual concern or where both countries would benefit from working together, sharing lessons learned, increasing trade and investment, cultural exchanges, and promoting global goods, notably human rights. Third, to participate in international negotiations bilaterally in the framework of the international organizations to which the diplomatic mission may be accredited to. Here, as I mentioned before, we have the OPCW, ICC, CFC, HCCH, just to mention some of them. Four, to monitor the evolution of the local political, economic, social, and cultural context, as well as to foresee the possible implications that it may have on foreign policy and on Argentina's national interests, and inform the capital and propose courses of action in a timely manner. For instance, here in the Netherlands, the latest or the position of the Dutch political parties and the private sector vis-a-vis the free trade agreement, Mercosur and Union. Fifth or sixth, I lost count, it would be to assist also the political authorities in the design of Argentina foreign policy and then to execute it in an effective manner. And of course, to promote ties of Argentines living abroad with their country of origin and provide them with the consular assistance that they may need. I would say that those are the core responsibilities of the work of the ambassador. And again, the ambassador is only the lead of a group of diplomats.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for answering the questions about diplomacy. We will now be moving to the topics of today's event. We would like to start with Argentina's relationship with the Netherlands. So, on this note, what is, in your opinion, the importance of the relationship between Argentina and the Netherlands? How does Argentina benefit from it, and vice versa?
Thank you very much for that very important question, because it goes, again, as you said, it goes to the heart of my job. The bond between Argentina and the Netherlands dates back to the beginning of our relationship of mutual friendship. Argentina and the Netherlands have many common values that are reflected in several joint initiatives at the multilateral level, in particular when it comes to the protection and promotion of human rights of LGBTIQ people, and the international cooperation in the investigation and prosecution of the crimes of genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes, through a treaty expected to be adopted later this year. Regarding LGBTIQ rights, Argentina and the Netherlands work together in the International Coalition for Equal Rights, a coalition that Argentina currently chairs together with the United Kingdom. The Netherlands is also one of Argentina's main commercial partners, being the seventh destination of Argentina's exports and is the third largest foreign direct investor in Argentina. In 2018, a consortium formed by INVAP, an Argentine company with Dutch partners, was awarded the design and construction of the state-of-the-art Palace reactor, one of the world's leading suppliers of medical isotopes used for diagnostic procedures and for treatment of cancer and cardiovascular diseases, which will start in 2025 in the Dutch town of Petten. This is very auspicious for the Argentine high-tech industry because it is setting foot in the European market for the first time. I think our shared values can be found also in a diversity of areas and institutions. Early in his presidency, President Alberto Fernandez announced the creation of the Economic and Social Council for Argentina's development, modeled after the Dutch SER, which brings together very different parties, including employers, employees, and independent experts, to reach agreements on societal issues. The Netherlands is also the seat of important organizations and tribunals, such as I mentioned before, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the Common Fund for Commodities, the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, the Permanent Court of Arbitration, and the Hague Conference on Private International Law. Inasmuch as the Hague is the international law capital of the world, Buenos Aires is becoming a regional capital, with the establishment in the past years of regional offices by the PCH and the HCCH there. I think in a period where multilateralism and international justice are under so much stress, Argentina, like the Netherlands, has faith and support for a world based on international law and international institutions. In 4 years, in 2025, it will mark 200 years of bilateral relations, providing an opportunity to relaunch the Argentine-Dutch partnership. And of course, there is Máxima, a daughter of Argentina, whose enormous popularity in the Netherlands gives Argentina visibility and creates a great synergy at all levels. You asked also how the relationship with the Netherlands has reflected or influenced Argentina's policy. Well, I think I have already responded to this, but let me just emphasize one area where the support of the Netherlands has been crucial, which is in the exposure of the human rights atrocities that were being committed by the latest Argentine dictatorship, by Dutch journalists, activists, and football players during the 1978 FIFA World Cup. The Dutch support gave visibility to the struggle of mothers of Plaza de Mayo in their search for their disappeared sons and daughters, many of which were pregnant. Yesterday alone, Argentina commemorated the 45th anniversary of the 1976 coup d'etat, with the launching of an international campaign called Help Us Find You, aimed at people, some of whom may be living abroad and who may have doubts about their identity, in that they may be the sons or the daughters of the disappeared, to find the truth and connect with their Argentine relatives. I would also add another issue where Argentina and the Netherlands work together, multilateral level, which is promoting Holocaust education, research and remembrance since 1998 in the framework of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IRA, but also through the partnership of the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam and the Centro Ana Frank in Buenos Aires. The only one in America and 1 in 3 outside of the Netherlands, if I am correct. The Centro Ana Frank has an ambitious program that aims at promoting rights and social inclusion, the empowerment of young people, and peer responsibility.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I think you made a great point about how important a country's diplomatic history is. We are now very curious, according to you, what are some of the major achievements in Argentina's diplomatic history?
Well, that is an extremely wide question. I think one of the greatest diplomatic achievements in the last decades would be the integration project in the framework of Mercosur. I think that is that is a project that has continued to be considered as a state policy, regardless of the change of government, the change of international context, and even in the context of the current pandemic. That is an integration process that, much like the European Union, goes beyond and besides deepening economic ties and promoting commerce and trade, but it involves integration of India in the scientific sector, in the technological sector, cultural exchange, migration policies, and physical integration, among others. I would say that's one of the most important achievements in the last decades, which implied or entailed to overcome years of distrust among neighbors. Of course, I can mention other. I think particularly since Argentina, but not only Argentina, other Latin American countries returned to democracy in the 80s. I think it has been an important achievement to help heal the fractures and the wounds of rivalry between with our neighbors. And that entails, for instance, solving most of our border issues with neighbor countries. And I would say also as another important achievement, the stance Argentina has taken internationally in the field of promoting human rights.
That was indeed very interesting. Super nice to know the side that is not European, more in relation to Latin American, at least on my side, that it's always really interesting for me to know about. Now we'll move on a little bit more to the next topic. One of the many reasons why we were very interested in having Your Excellency join our event is because we've seen that Argentina has become a leading example to countries in Latin America and not only, particularly with the adoption of the new legislation on legalizing abortion. Due to that, we would like to ask some questions regarding gender equality. Specifically, what is the current Argentine government position with regards to gender equality?
Thank you very much for that very important question. We are indeed very proud for the advancements that have taken place in Argentina when it comes to the gender agenda, even though there is a lot to be done. Argentina stands out, I would say, for its leadership, as you said, in matters related to gender equality, through a strong presence in the regional and the international fora, including the United Nations, the Organization of American States, and the EU CELAC law. Women have attained a relatively high level of equality in Argentina. They enjoy comparable levels of education and somewhat higher school enrollment ratios than men. And they are well integrated in the nation's cultural and intellectual life, although less so in the nation's economy. Despite this progress, women in Argentina continue to face numerous systemic challenges, including domestic violence, which is a serious problem, as are obstacles to the timely prosecution of rape, the prevalence of sexual harassment, and persistent gender pay gap, among other inequalities. In the last year, the government has consistently put in place measures to promote gender equality. The National Council for Women, and since December 2019, the Ministry for Women, Genders and Diversity, carry out efforts to promote equality in the social, political, and economic areas for women. Gender equality is an area where it would be fair to say women and the women movements have been the driving force. Although the government has embraced their struggle out of the conviction that women's rights are human rights, and that gender equality is not only good for women, but for progress and for the society as a whole. As you said, the latest and very significant achievement was the passing of the law on voluntary interruption of pregnancy, as it is called, with which women finally conquered in Argentina the right to decide.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Indeed, that is a big achievement. To build up on this important subject, which is gender equality, which I personally think everyone is and should be engaged with, what effect did the ratification of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women had on Argentina's international policy? How is this internal policy reflected in the international community?
Thank you, Gustavo, for that question. Argentina is like many countries, like most countries, I would say, is a signatory to the main international treaties on women's human rights, in particularly the CEDAW, which you just mentioned, and also the Inter-American Convention on the Prevention, Punishment, and Eradication of Violence Against Women, known as Convention on Belén do Pará. The impact of CEDAW on Argentina's internal policies have been noticed, I would say. In 1994, the CEDAW was given constitutional status in Argentina, together with the other main international instruments on human rights, and that has in turn impacted heavily in the legislative reforms and the interpretation and application by the courts of the old laws. For example, in 1992, 5% of the lower house of Parliament and the Senate were women. 5%. Nowadays, 45% of deputies and 41% of senators are women. Yet, when it comes to ministers and governors and mayors, women are still lagging behind. I mentioned already the creation of the Ministry of Women and the passing of abortion legislation. The Ministry for Women, Genders and Diversity has also the mandate to promote the rights of the IQ people and the trans population in particular, which are areas where Argentina has one of the most progressive legislations worldwide. In 2020, Argentina has also designed and then started to implement a national plan of action against gender-based violence 2022, which consists of comprehensive assistance programs for people in situations of violence and financial support, interministerial programs, and projects to address extreme violence. In addition to other initiatives that reflect, I would say, the materialization of the political will to transform Argentina into a country with opportunities and rights for all. Foreign policy is another area where concrete actions have been taken to achieve substantive equality with women. This very year, for instance, equal number of women and men have been made ambassadors. I think that the rationale has been that while an adequate normative system or framework is necessary, it is not a sufficient condition to achieve gender equality. Because a profound social and cultural transformation requires both targeted public policies and efforts to ensure the mainstreaming of the gender perspective in all programs, actions, and projects emanating from the national public administration. And of course, that is also is reflected in Argentina's foreign policy, in bilateral relations, and also in the international forum.
Thank you very much. On this note, we're also curious to know if there's something a little bit more specific that the Argentinian embassy in the Netherlands does to promote gender equality, Or what do you think should be done in order to ensure that gender equality is being promoted in the field of diplomacy?
Well, in the case, we are lucky enough to be in a country where, like in Argentina, gender equality is very much a long-standing policy of the government. In this regard, the work that we do here in New York, here in The Hague at the embassy is cooperating with the Netherlands, particularly in articulating common positions in the international forum. That is basically what the core of the work that we do here in the Netherlands. But of course, there are other initiatives that take place, including in the framework of a network of Argentine scientists here in the Netherlands, which Argentina is promoting worldwide, and with which we are trying to push the gender agenda. To mention an initiative that is in the cooking, in the next at the end of this month, on the 31st, we are also promoting a dialogue. We are organizing or co-organizing a dialogue between the Association of Argentine women judges with the women judges at the International Criminal Court, in order to exchange views on how both in domestic tribunals and in international tribunals there is a gender dimension to the work of the tribunals and to the very judgments. Those are some of the recent initiatives that we have been undertaking.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Argentina's very diverse and broad ambitions in the field of international trade also spark our interest. Therefore, regarding this area, I would like to ask, what are some of the objectives of Argentina's international trade policies?
Yeah, thank you again. This is also a very important question. Some of it I have already touched upon very briefly, but I will articulate a little bit more. I would say, generally speaking, Argentina's foreign policy seeks to expand and diversify our exports, as well as to stimulate investment. The search for better markets and for market access conditions covers the 5 continents, exploiting our potential in developed and emerging markets in both agricultural and industrial products. Our trade policy seeks to achieve, as I mentioned before, a common Mercosur trade policy that is the product of consensus and consistent with the improvement of the regional integration project. A negotiation agenda that takes into account the export interests of all sectors. An inclusive integration that articulates the agenda of external negotiations with the productive development policy, and a progressive integration contemplating the protection of the environment and the inclusion of all social sectors in international trade. To this end, we propose flexibility and adaptation so that the agreements that we negotiate and we reach contemplate the reality of vulnerable and or less competitive sectors, and transparency and consultation with the productive sectors and the civil society, both of which are key to a new convergence.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Building up a little bit more on this, you mentioned before the Mercosur trade agreement. Now we would like to focus a little bit more on its impact and importance of having an EU Mercosur trade agreement.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sofia, for that question. Mercosur is, as I mentioned before, Mercosur is Argentina's most important regional political project. It is a state policy, and as such, it stands above circumstantial changes, including the crisis generated by the pandemic. It is a project based on an economic and a commercial axis, but its scope and dimension transcends that sphere. Argentina is convinced that deepening Mercosur is the most appropriate tool to achieve higher levels of development for its population, for the competitiveness of the economies of Mercosur countries, and for the international projection of the bloc. We think that advancing in the internal agenda strengthens Mercosur in its external trade negotiations. The Mercosur-EU trade negotiations were launched in 1999 and concluded in June 2019, so 10 years later. The current status is an ongoing legal review, which was initiated in September 2019. In June last year, the remaining articles of the political and cooperation pillar of the agreements were concluded. There are still some outstanding issues, which include a list of prior users of certain terms to be protected in Mercosur state parties as geographical indications of the European Union. I think that despite criticism, particularly from agriculture and environmental sectors in Europe, the agreement protects their sensitivities and concerns. For example, the agreement sets importation quotas for Mercosur products and not free access, while providing for free access for EU companies to the service sector in Mercosur. The agreement also has a chapter on trade and sustainable development, where the parties assume stringent environmental and labor commitments consistent with the Paris Climate Agreement and the International Labour Organization. And in the case of controversies, there is also recourse to a panel of experts, and it increases substantially the phytosanitary controls. I would add that apart from the EU, currently Mercosur is negotiating with 10 countries or group of countries with varying degrees of progress. That is EFTA, Canada, Korea, Singapore, Lebanon, Israel, Vietnam, Indonesia, India, and the Pacific Alliance. For my government, the current external agenda is an important part of the integration scheme with Mercosur, and therefore Argentina will continue to work internally and with its partners in order to consolidate the negotiating roadmap in a way that contemplates the sensitivities of all.
Thank you, Your Excellency. That is indeed pretty insightful. Argentina, in multiple times, has reflected in numerous initiatives, contributions for the progress development of international human rights law. To this end, what are some of the core values of the Argentinian society concerning civil and human rights? I know this has been already answered, but however, we would like to know this in a little bit more detail.
Thank you, Gustavo. To list some, I would say freedom, democracy, human rights, solidarity, multiculturalism, religious freedom, and gender equality. I think those are central to Argentina society and as a corollary to governmental policies. I think these values are also the guiding principles and the objectives and the tools of our foreign policy. As I mentioned before, since the return to democracy in 1983, Argentina has made the promotion and protection of human rights a fundamental pillar of its foreign policy. Argentina is among the countries with the highest human rights standards. The most, and I mentioned this again before, the most relevant international human rights treaties have a constitutional status, which means that there can be no derogation from them, and that they prevail over domestic laws and other international treaties. Although human rights standards in Argentina largely exceed those required by the international system, the country has deemed it appropriate to expand rights generally, as well as the rights of certain vulnerable minorities and groups. As I mentioned before, I think diversity and multiculturalism are outstanding characteristics of our society. A country formed of immigrants, basically, and those characteristics are a source of pride for Argentinians. One of its manifestations is religious freedom and complete separation of church and state. For example, there is no religious education in public schools in Argentina, and marriage can only be performed legally by a governmental officer, both since the late 19th century. That was commensurate with its open border policies since the country became independent. Furthermore, human dignity is a value that we seek to protect through the application of international humanitarian law, and thus we are also very active in the international fora to strengthen this set of international norms aimed at limiting the effects of armed conflict. And in the same vein, Argentina has sought to promote and strengthen international justice, with the International Criminal Court at its core as part of its state policy on human rights.
Thank you, Excellency. Personally, I think, as you said, I personally think it is pretty important to have a complete separation of church and state. Lastly, our final topic of the day will be education. We decided to ask you something concerning this due to the fact that you have a vast experience in the academic field, especially as you were a professor of private and public international law in Argentina. So, in your opinion, how important is for students in Argentina to be encouraged and introduced to an international environment?
Gracias, Gustavo. First of all, let me point out that education in Argentina is recognized as a right. Therefore, the Argentine state ensures equality, gratuity, secularism, and access to all levels of education for the entire population living in Argentina, including migrants and foreigners that reside in Argentina, who have the same rights as the Argentine nationals to access education and to be admitted to institutions at all levels, whether public or private. In turn, the Argentine state ensures free access to education from kindergarten to university through public educational institutions located throughout the country. This ensures that students have the option of studying in the provinces in which they live or in other cities of their choice. Argentina's universities enjoy great regional and international recognition due to the quality of their professors, their curricula, and the diversity of their fields of study. As an example, I mentioned the University of Buenos Aires, which in this year was ranked 66th in the global ranking of 1,000 universities by the international consulting firm QS. During the last few years, and due to the fact that the Argentine public university is free of charge and has practically no barriers to entry, both of which are very rare characteristics in Latin America and in the world, the number of foreign students, mainly from neighboring countries, Brazil, Chile, Bolivia, Peru, Paraguay, Mexico, Venezuela, to mention some, has grown significantly. It is estimated that the percentage of foreign students represent 3% of the total number of students in Argentina. That is around 54,000 people. For those students who wish to study abroad, the Argentine government also grants international study and research scholarships for Argentines abroad and for foreigners in Argentina. I would like to take this opportunity, if you allow me, to inform those of you who are interested that you can consult the website argentina.gov.ar, where you will find scholarships for master's, doctoral, and postdoctoral studies and research. And you will also find some long-term programs in the field of international educational cooperation through reciprocity and co-financing agreements with local, regional, or global actors.
Very much, Your Excellency. I'm pretty sure that many people will access to that link and find the information they need, since most of us are actually about to finish the career. We are halfway through. Again, thank you for your answers to our questions. So now we will be opening the floor for questions from attendees. So for those watching from YouTube, feel free to add your questions in the chat. We will also ask those. Please be aware that the priority will be given to the ones that are raising their hands.
You're also welcome to introduce yourselves or just type it in the chat. If you do that, we will just read it out loud. We would like to begin now with a question that was sent to us in the sign-up form. Your Excellency, does a multilateral diplomatic post, such as the one you held in the UN, require different competence than a bilateral diplomatic post?
No, I don't think it requires a different kind of training or a different kind of a diplomat. Of course, they are both different and requires training. I think there are, of course, colleagues who have specialized within the Foreign Service in either consular matters, or who have always and only spent their career in bilateral embassies or in multilateral fora. Of course, I think in both bilaterally and multilaterally, the main characteristics of diplomats need to be there. In both contexts, you are representing your country, you are defending its interests, you need to be a good negotiator. So I would say not necessarily.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I see that there are some hands up. I'm gonna give the floor to, let me see, Bernardita Perez Sarrier. You have the floor. You can unmute yourself and you can just ask the question.
Thank you so much. Well, hello, my name is Bernardita and I'm in 5th year and I'm from Argentina. So it was wonderful to hear from you and your experience as an ambassador, because that is what I want to be in the future. So it's not a question, but it's to say thank you for taking the time to explain to us how this works, because it's like my dream job to represent Argentina in another country. So yeah, when you were starting, you said that your father told you to study law, and that is what my father told me this year. So I relate so much to you, so thank you for your experience and everything that you told us. So I will pursue this, and I hope that one day I will be an ambassador like you. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Es un placer, un gusto que haya argentinos en esta conversación. And of course, I will be. I think the diplomatic career is a very inspiring one. For me, in particular, there is no greater honor than serving your country, and of course, it comes with its share of frustrations, and like in any other job, I presume. But it is a very rewarding career. is very enriching from not only professional point of view, but also personally. So you also, I would add that I am from a different generation. When I joined the Foreign Service, which wasn't too long ago, pursuing a career, if you were interested in international relations or international laws, in international law, the opportunities were more limited in a way. If you wanted to be an actor of international law or foreign relations, you would be either in academia or the Foreign Service. Fortunately, today, there is a way, those opportunities are wider in terms of the possibilities of pursuing a career in international organizations, in NGOs. And from that point of view, I think it's something that you can do from many perspectives, but in my case, of course, serving your country can never be compared to other positions.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. That was very insightful, not only for Argentinians, but I think everyone can take example of that. Now I see there's another hand up. Yes, Altamash Kahil, please.
Hello, Your Excellency. It's an honor to have you here. My name is Altamash Khalil. I study at the Hague University of Applied Sciences, International and European Law. If on a personal note, if I may, before I ask my question, I love the Argentinian football team. Since my country doesn't play football, so whenever there's a World Cup qualifier or World Cup match, I ardently support the Argentinian football team. And today, I realized that there's so much more to learn from Argentina and so much more to love about Argentina. Thank you for that. It was really an eye-opener. And if I may move on to my question now, Your Excellency, do you think the current pandemic will have a lasting impact on how the international diplomacy is and will be conducted?
Thank you very much, Altamash. A pleasure. I mentioned before that there are different ways of doing diplomacy in a way, working for the government, for international organizations, for an NGO. Well, there are different kinds of diplomacy as well. I think the promotion of Argentina, of a country's values and of a country's interests and image is no longer, if it was ever the case, the work of diplomats. I think there is the cultural diplomacy, there is the sports diplomacy, and in a way, from that point of view, our work has changed a lot because we not only promote our political interests or our trade, but also it's part of our job to see and to use sports, to use culture in order to see how we can use them as tools for cooperation and to unite, because sports and culture unite. So it's important. As to the question, fascinating question. I think it's something that we diplomats are struggling very much with, like any sectors of society. I think the transformation of the diplomacy has started a long time ago. Of course, the pandemic gives a different dimension, but as I was somehow hinting at, these days, the diplomacy is not only the realm of diplomats. There is the diplomacy of the heads of state. There is this which of course it takes place in summits, but it also takes place in phone calls, and some of which we diplomats we only find out after the fact. So it is going to change, I think, but at the same time, I think most of my colleagues, we are very mindful of the fact that for diplomacy to be effective, we need to take stock and benefit from digital resources. But at the same time, the interpersonal relationship is crucial. To give you an idea, when you have to negotiate a deal, in most cases, those are not. The deals are broken during the breaks in an international conference, where you can actually sit in front of a paper and actually be integrative and creative. And it is very difficult to do in this virtual environment. So, and you need to create trust. I think I referred to that. You need to be truthful. You need to create trust. You need to create a personal relationship with your colleagues. They need to know you, and they need to know that you're a person of honor, that if you say that this is my red line, it is because it's my red line. And that if I commit to something, then they need to be able to trust me. And when you don't have this possibility, it becomes very difficult. So I think it's going to have an impact. There's probably going to be people are resistant to change in general. So I think we are going to benefit from using more the virtual technologies. That is very useful, particularly for countries with less resources that cannot send experts or participate in every single international negotiation because that costs money. But at the same time, it also enhances the value of personal diplomacy and being present.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Yes, this was indeed very interesting. I see that there is another hand from Bianca. So, Bianca, the floor is yours. You can.
Thank you very much, and thank you again, Your Excellency, for answering all our questions. Well, at the beginning, you actually you mentioned the ICSID, which is the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes, and I was wondering if maybe you could tell us a little more as member of the panel of arbitrators. Since it's something that really fascinates me, as I'm a commercial law student, and I'm actually now studying, focusing on investment law, and and one of my assignments is also related to this. So when I heard it, it really caught my attention immediately.
Thank you, Bianca Maria. Well, of course, we could be talking hours about investment arbitration. I remember when I taught my course at the Hague Academy, I asked how many people are interested in public international law, how many people were interested in private international law, and how many people are interested in international commercial arbitration and commercial and investment arbitration in general. And the fact is that there are probably more people interested in pursuing a career in arbitration, perhaps because that's how you make the money, more than diplomats for sure. But no, not necessarily. Of course, it's a very fascinating field of expertise. I think the ICSID, and not only ICSID, but the Permanent Court of Arbitration, and the variety of institutions that provide for arbitration services around the world has suffered from a huge development in the last decades, particularly since the 90s, but even before, with the the search of VITs, bilateral investment treaties, and also the chapters in international trade agreements. I think the arbitration system, particularly when applied to investment arbitration, has both showed its potential and also its problems. It has helped protect investors to a degree that many countries and non-state actors consider these days that are detrimental to sustainable development and the protection of human rights. It is very interesting how, when you look, when I was in the foreign ministry, younger, a more junior diplomat, I remember that particularly developing countries were at the forefront of the reform of the investment arbitration system. And it is fascinating to see how, throughout the years, the lead has been taken by Europe, for instance, because not only developing countries, but also developed countries have realized that the system to become efficient and fair needs to go substantial reform, in particular to avoid contradictory judgments and awards, to respect further the right of the state to regulate, and also to evaluate and the excesses, of course, of the system in terms of the high costs of arbitration and the impact on human rights. So I think there are important discussions ongoing in that regard.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I see that there is another hand, so we would now like to give the floor to Lily.
Thank you, Sophia. Hello, Your Excellency. Thank you so much for answering all of your questions and listening to us. I just firstly would like to go off Altamash's point about the Argentinian soccer team. Not only do they have a brilliant soccer team, their rugby team is also insane, having won against the All Blacks last year, which is just unthinkable for so many. But that's just a side point. What I did want to ask, though, is, as you mentioned already, your job is essentially to fight for your country's values and their interests in negotiations and stuff. My question is, how do you compromise your own values if they don't align with what it is that you're arguing for? And how do you balance that professionally, but also personally, when you are the face of your country?
Thank you, Lily. It's a very, it goes to the core, and those are dilemmas that we face. We cannot agree. A person in general, in any organization, it's difficult to, you're never going to agree on everything. I see the work of a foreign service officer, of a career diplomat, as I see my job as an advisor that has the obligations to speak out, even if that upsets your boss, your foreign minister, when you think that something is wrong, that it would compromise your country's values, or it will be detrimental at some point. You do that within the chain of command, and of course you do not do that outside of your government. I think at the end of the day, to go to the point, at the end of the day, if what I have been instructed to do is not illegal or immoral, you need to defer to your authorities because you are part of an organization. If in an organization like a country, every person in the military, any diplomat, parts way according to its own values, an organization can function. So the limits are the law, and the limits are my conscience. At the end of the day, that is what it comes to. I would not go to a court. I would not be. I would not I would not put myself in a position where I am breaking the law or I cannot sleep at night. Fortunately, I have not been faced with that situation, but particularly during the Argentina's dictatorship, some of my colleagues were faced with that situation. And when you reach a point where you cannot live with a decision that you have been instructed to implement, then you resign.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That's a lot to think about for future in case of going into a job as important as yours. But thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Moving now to the questions from the chat. I read here, Your Excellency, I was wondering what hardships or difficulties that come across can be expected in such a career.
Thank you. Also very interesting. Well, I think some of them I refer that, and I will elaborate on others. But I think one hardship that you would face could be, I don't know if we call it frustration, but that policies that you think are right for your countries that do not come to fruition or somehow are overruled by the political authorities. So the diplomacy comes with a number of frustrations, but you need to move on. I think perhaps the hardships also come from the personal side. I think I mentioned that before. Being a diplomat is more than a career. Is choosing a way of life. Is choosing to move from one country to the other every 3 years. Is choosing your spouse most likely not being able to work. Your children. If you have children or you decide to have a family, also losing friends or making and losing friends every so often. I think for me, probably one of the biggest dilemmas is when I move to a country, how much you want to create roots. How much you are willing to make new friends, knowing that at some point those ties and those friends that you make, you are going to be able to have to leave them, and that will probably break your heart. So I think probably the biggest hardship is the foreign service. In the foreign service is your personal what takes from your personal point of view. The fact that after having lived abroad for so many years, you come back to Argentina, and I notice with older colleagues of mine, you give so much to the foreign service in terms of again of relationships in particular, that when you go back to Argentina and you are no longer in the foreign service, the emptiness can be problematic.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. This was really nice to know on a personal level. It's a really nice insight to have. For sure, admire anyone who would take such a position as yours now. Moving on to another question that we've got in the chat. You mentioned you held various positions through your career. Which work experience will you say has been the one that pushed you the most in terms of future opportunities arising out of it?
Again, very interesting, because not always the work that you like the most is necessarily the one that teaches you the best lessons. I think you learn from I don't know, I can't pick one. I think you learn different things. I think my job as a consul, as a deputy consul in New York, was extremely rewarding. If you ask me how much I enjoyed it, probably not that much, because it takes a toll personally, because you deal with people in distress. But at the same time, it can be very rewarding at the personal level, because when you do something for a person, it is something that can be seen. It's not a negotiation of a treaty whose benefits are going to be seen by humanity in 20 years. So I think being a consul taught me how to deal with people, how to deal with the press, how to say no, how to put yourself in other person's shoes. It teaches you empathy, because it's a person what you have in front of you. Then I was working at the UN, in the United Nations, in the Security Council in particular. That gives you a perspective of the world that is unique. I would say it's impossible to know about situations in every single continent from a book, or from just studying. It gives you a wider perspective of how countries behave, of how diverse we are. So that was fascinating. But again, if you ask me if I enjoyed every single moment of it, by no means. When we were in the Security Council, I don't think I had a weekend in 2 years. So I was looking forward for it to end. But in retrospect, it was wonderful, and I wouldn't change it for anything. My job as a legal advisor, well, if you ask me, is the job that I like the most. It's a job where you are basically involved in every single important issue that is dealt with by the foreign ministry, because every single political issue or economic issue has a legal implication, particularly in Argentina, where abiding by international law is taken seriously. So I loved every minute of it. I thought it was rewarding intellectually. But of course, I didn't enjoy every single thing. But it was I think fascinating. It teaches you also the contours of the law, which is very different from being in academia. When you are a counsel for the state, you are not a law professor, and you need to you develop. You need to be able to give advice to your country, but you also need to say where is the red line, and that can also take a toll, because ministers don't like that. And here in the Netherlands, I'm doing something completely different, which is, of course, I have the international organizations, but I also have the bilateral issues. perhaps I can tell you more in a year, because when I arrived, I arrived here the day before the pandemic was declared by the internationally. So it has been a little weird, but in terms of what my job entails. But it is teaching me a dimension, the bilateral dimension, which is very much new to me. So but again, they are different learning experiences, and in which you have lots of good moments and lots of frustrations.
Thank you, Your Excellency. As you said, I personally consider that learning how to say no is the most difficult thing to learn. Unfortunately, this will have to be the second to the last question due to the time restraints we have right now. So the question is, what is the most rewarding part about being a diplomat? I think this has been already covered, but I think maybe explaining this in a little bit more detail will be important.
Well, professionally, I think I think serving your country it may sound a little bit cheeky, you know, but serving your country is very rewarding. For me, it is extremely rewarding. You how do you say that in English? But you put yourself there, and you cannot avoid bringing and putting national interests as considering them as personal in a way. So, of course, when an initiative that's something that you believe in comes to fruition, is extremely rewarding. Personally, of course, getting to know countries where I would never thought I would go, particularly because there are places where there is armed conflict and access is very restricted. As I was at the United Nations, I visited, to give you an idea, Darfur. I was at the time, Argentina was presiding the sanctions committee on the Sudan, so we visited Darfur. I visited Yemen. I visited South Sudan, Somalia. So those are places it's difficult to access these days. You meet people from different parts of the world, and if you're lucky enough, you will meet them again. You make friends, and you will meet them again. Just to give you an idea, in New York, I became friends with my then colleague from Brazil and from the UK and from Rwanda. Now they are the ambassadors of those countries here in the Netherlands. So in a way, when you move to a country and you have friends there that you know from your previous life, it's very welcoming. It helps you settle down. You know?
Thank you so much for your answers. And thank you, everybody, for your questions. And again, your answers, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Your Excellency. To close, I think I speak for everyone when I say that this was an amazing event. On behalf of the Hague University of Applied Sciences and the International Life Student Association, the Hague chapter, we would once again like to thank Your Excellency for giving us the chance and the honor to engage in such a captivating conversation. Everything that Your Excellency has said has been very eye-opening and definitely something very interesting. It was a real pleasure, especially for me, to be part of this event. Having a first interaction with the vibrant and inspiring culture of Argentina, which now more than ever, me and I'm pretty sure everyone here sees with great admiration.
Thank you very much, Bianca Maria and Sofia and Gustavo and all of you for attending. It has been my pleasure to be able to exchange views, and I also learn from your questions, because it makes you think, you know. So it's I wish you good luck with further and future chapters of this project. Congratulate you for this, and I thank you again. And of course, I remain available for anything that you may need from me or my embassy.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Lastly would like just to thank your office, as without their cooperation, this event would never have happened. I'm certain our attendees have learned a lot today, particularly your invaluable advice, and I'm certain it resonated with all the students here. This would also conclude the first edition of ILSA's Diplomacy Days. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you everybody who has joined us for the last 3 days. Before you leave, just don't forget to keep an eye on our social media platforms. We have prepared a lot of events in the very near future. And thank you again, and have a great day. It was a pleasure, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Sophia. And yes, once again, I would like to say on behalf of ILSA and the Hague University and our program, it was such a pleasure having you here as guest. And I would also like to point out how pleased I am that not only you, Your Excellency, but also Gustavo and Sofia talked about cooperation, because I really think that it's a key point, cooperation between two countries, and in this case between Argentina and the Netherlands in today's world. And I know I like to think that our university and our program is trying in some ways to do their part as well when it comes to cooperation. For example, with our exchange programs, we have exchange with programs with different countries within Europe, but also with the US, Japan. We also have collaborations with cooperation with Brazil, Uruguay, and since we are here in your presence, we are also speaking with the University of Torquato di Teglia, if I'm pronouncing correctly, and we are now speaking with them and seeking cooperation as well. So that's very well suited news for today's event.
Of course, of course, anything that I can do in order to help with your. Of course, it seems that you have a very very good articulation already in place. But anything that we can do here from the embassy would be my pleasure. So again, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. That was very unexpected and really generous. So thank you. And yeah,